The LAPD now had a major case on their hands and a lot of questions to go with it. They went over Sophie's story again with her, and she repeated that Jean left on October 7th between 5 and 5:30. She was going to meet Dexter and then head off to a film shoot. She did tell police that about 2 hours after she left, Jean called Sophie from a payphone to say goodnight to Christine and to confirm that she would be working all night and definitely would not be home until morning. With that, Jean said her goodnights and hung up. Sophie really didn't have anything new to tell the police, but something worth mentioning, although I don't really think it factors into the story, mostly because it's an aftermath sort of thing, but actor Robert Stack, who hosted Unsolved Mysteries, oddly enough, well, he was a working actor who happened to know Jean. He says he drove right by Jean's apartment here on the night of her disappearance and remembers seeing someone, wasn't sure if it was a man or a woman, but somebody was lurking right outside that window by the front door. He didn't pay much attention and kept driving home. It wasn't until after the news of Jean's disappearance hit that he even mentioned it to the Spangler family. I don't think it even made its way to the police. It's really a non-story. It's just kind of funny and ironic that the host of Unsolved Mysteries wasn't a helpful witness. In 2001, a man named Kyle J. Wood tracked down Sophie Spangler, who was in her early 80s and still very sharp. She recalled her memory of that phone call from Jean, which took place right here in a phone booth at what was once called the Town and Country Market.
So anyway, she called me from Town and Country. There was a little market over there at 6 o'clock, and she said, I'll let you know. She always would let me know when she was, wherever she went, she'd leave the phone number there that I could call her in case they think something happened at home. And then if she was going to leave, she would call me and tell me, I'm leaving, but I'll call you again when I get to the new spot. But when she left at 6 o'clock, the last call that I had from her, she looked like she was in a hurry. Like whoever it was, she was in a phone booth, and she saw the car, so she had to hang up in a hurry. That was the last time I heard her.
Well, this is about as historical as it gets around here, and we're very lucky to still have it. The good old farmer's market, here since 1934. Dupar's Diner, too, here since 1938. Really miraculous. Directly behind it all is CBS Television City, so I featured it in my Carol Burnett tour. Walked around inside of it if you want to check that out. It's also directly across the street from the old Town and Country Market, as well as Jean's apartment over there. And while Sophie hadn't heard of any plans for Jean to walk over here before meeting Dexter, eyewitnesses recounted seeing Jean here during the time frame from when she left home up until around 7. An employee told police that Jean had been nervously pacing and continuously checking the time, clearly anticipating the arrival of someone. Another witness corroborated this same vibe. They said Jean seemed impatient and nervous. But why? The police, they just kept hitting dead ends. But in regards to the note found in Jean's purse, they questioned every doctor in LA with the last or first name Scott. Nothing. When a girlfriend of Jean's told police that Jean was a few months pregnant, they immediately believed that Jean's note was in reference to getting an abortion. Jean's family, they had no reason to believe she was pregnant, but that note certainly suggests that her friend was most likely telling the truth. If Jean was looking to have an abortion, it would have definitely had to have been as discreet as possible, given that it was completely illegal back in 1949. So it's also very unlikely that any doctor performing abortions would have admitted to knowing Jean. This Dr. Scott was never identified. However, friends and family were aware of a Scotty. There's CBS behind the Container Store. Oh. And while the farmer's market is now attached to the Grove shopping mall, it really still does have a lot of its old charm. There's even a replica of an old gas station bearing the name Gilmore, an homage to the Gilmore field that used to stand next door. It's all in the Carol Burnett tour. Anyway, Scotty turned out to be the name of that guy Jean had an affair with while Dexter was off serving. Well, it didn't end well. He was apparently very abusive, very violent, and he even threatened to kill Jean. But that all happened a few years prior, and really, it was all old news. Police ruled him out. But they did want to question a mystery man apparently in her life. Actor Bob Cummings, he was a big TV and film actor of his day and happened to star in a film that Jean had worked on just 2 weeks prior to her disappearance, called The Petty Girl. Well, he told detectives that he recalled Jean whistling as she walked by his dressing room on the studio backlot. He yelled out to her, "You seem happy," to which she replied, "I am. I have a new romance." When he asked if it was serious, she replied, "No, not really, but I'm having the time of my life." Police wanted to know more about this. Who was this casual fling, and could he be the Kirk mentioned in the note found in Jean's purse? As soon as Florence Spangler heard about her daughter's purse being found, she made her way back home from Kentucky. Naturally, she was just distraught and inconsolable. I mean, she had been through this already with her son and now her baby Jean. She painted a very positive portrait of her daughter to the police. Didn't seem to think she had a serious man in her life, and when it came time to being questioned about this Kirk mentioned in the note, she was shocked to learn that the police had a Kirk in mind, a very famous one. However, she didn't have much to offer the police in terms of clues. She said there was a man Jean was dating, but he never came to the door, always waited in the car out front, and yeah, his name could have been Kirk, maybe. Either way, Kirk Douglas was going to be questioned by the police. Jean had put her Screen Actors Guild union membership to good use and was booking background and extra gigs. However, telling Sophie that she was booked on set that night was false. Police checked with every studio, and not only was she not on anyone's schedule, but there were no night shoots whatsoever happening on October 7th, 1949. And Jean's film career, I mean, if you can even call it that, was just getting going. She didn't appear on film until 1948, and she only worked on about 7 or 8 films before disappearing. You can see her briefly in Mummy's Dummies, a Three Stooges short film, one of 190 of them that they made for Columbia Studios. She's only in it for a few seconds. She played a chorus girl in When My Baby Smiles at Me, a musical for 20th Century Fox released in 1948, starring Betty Grable. Actually, she did 2 for Fox starring Betty Grable. The other one was Wabash Avenue, released in 1950. Also in 1950 was Champagne for Caesar, starring Celeste Holm. Some of these films, they came out after she disappeared, and it's hard to spot her in a few of them because she's in big group scenes. But there is one that stands out. It's by far her biggest exposure. She even gets to speak one line. And what's great is she got to see it because it came out in 1948. The Miracle of the Bells, it's called, and it starred Fred MacMurray and Frank Sinatra. For once, she's not a chorus girl or a dancer. She's downplayed, just a townsperson in a church of all places. I already mentioned The Petty Girl with Bob Cummings, but there was another movie, her last movie. And it was filmed right here in Burbank on the Warner Brothers lot. 1950's Young Man with a Horn, starring Lauren Bacall, Doris Day, and Kirk Douglas. He plays a tortured trumpet player, torn between goody-goody Doris or bad girl Bacall. And when police checked with the Screen Actors Guild and saw that Jean had recently appeared as a dancer in a nightclub scene in this film, they weren't going to just let it slide that the star of the film happened to be named Kirk. I came here earlier today to show you this house and lucked out and then didn't luck out. First, I was excited because the gate was open and you could see everything. However, there was so much loud construction that made telling this next part impossible. It's much quieter now, but we can't see. But this is where Kirk Douglas was living at the time of Jean's disappearance. It was built in 1927 and was renovated in 1970. As you can see, it's getting another major renovation. Surprisingly, though, it doesn't look too far off from what it did back in 1949. Now, Kirk had been married to his wife Diana since 1943, and they had two sons, Michael Douglas, born in 1944, and Joel, born in 1947. Now, it's pretty widely known that Kirk was quite the womanizer and that he had cheated on his wife several times. He admitted this himself in his own autobiography. He cheated on his second wife, too, and his liaisons were apparently with several leading ladies of the silver screen. His biggest scandal comes in the form of Natalie Wood's sister, Lana, claiming that Kirk raped Natalie at the Chateau Marmont during the summer of 1955 when Natalie was just a teenager. Supposedly, her mother convinced her to stay quiet so that her career wouldn't be ruined. The story had been a Hollywood rumor for years, and Vanity Fair even ran the story of the claim in 2021, the year after Kirk Douglas died. Now, how about this? Coincidentally, Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner were living just a few houses down from where I'm standing right now, here on Cannon Drive, when she drowned in 1981. But back in October of 1948, LA detective Thad Brown had no problem questioning Kirk Douglas, and Kirk had no problem telling Brown he had no idea who she was. He wasn't the Kirk in the note. Thanks for asking. Goodbye. But then, a couple days later, Kirk called Brown and changed his tune. He played it off like he originally had no idea who the police were talking about, but that, yeah, someone reminded me that I did know her. I just didn't know her by name, but sorry, I kind of did kid around with her on set like I do with all the extras. The female ones. Even a dancer named Nancy Chaplin, who appeared in the film, told Brown that Kirk and Jean were very friendly with one another on set. But Kirk insisted that he and Jean never dated or saw each other off set. He said that he was in Palm Springs on the night she disappeared, and Brown and the police were like, sure, of course, sorry to bother you, Mr. Douglas. And that was that. What perfect imagery. So symbolic of what may have been Jean's last night. Police believed, and it's pretty much stated as fact in the Gene Spangler story, that this is the last known place she was seen alive, here on the Sunset Strip at the intersection of Laurel Canyon Boulevard. We're looking west, and then this way, eastward, down the strip about 4 or 5 major blocks, is the old Earl Carroll Theater, but this massive complex right in front of us stands where the old Schwab's Pharmacy sat. It was a great old building. You can see it in 1950s Sunset Boulevard when William Holden drives up and runs into Schwab's. Schwab's, so fun to say, was an old soda fountain hotspot, really trendy. There's an old Hollywood tale that Lana Turner was discovered at Schwab's. She wasn't, but this was told as fact for quite some time. Schwab's opened in 1932 and closed in 1983, an incredible run. The building was demolished in 1988 to make way for a movie complex with lots of retail. I can't come here and not mention Schwab's, but it really has nothing to do with our story. So moving along over here to a building that does, and lucky for us, this building is still the same. The businesses have changed, so many have come and gone. Like the Cheese Box, a restaurant cafe which occupied one of the spots here in this building. Now, supposedly there was a DJ named Chic Lazar who was known for going around from table to table interviewing diners for his radio show. Well, he claims that Jean was definitely in the cafe. He says that he saw her around 2:30 a.m. with 2 men, and when he approached them for an interview, they hushed him and shooed him away. He says they seemed to be arguing. He didn't know who the men were, but he definitely recognized Jean. And things only get weirder. A gas station attendant named Art Rogers, he called the police to say that in the wee hours, a blue-gray convertible pulled in to fill up at his station here on the strip, a few blocks west. There's now a hotel there. He says that the male driver had him fill the tank while a female sat slumped over in the passenger seat. The driver said they were heading to Fresno. But as they were pulling away, apparently the woman sat up and yelled, "Get this license plate, call the police, have them follow me." Well, police showed this attendant photos of Jean, and he swore that she was the woman who was begging to be followed. These sightings just can't be confirmed, but they're very compelling to the story, as is this next theory, one that has stuck like glue to Jean's disappearance, that the mob was involved. Now keep in mind, late 1940s, a time when the mob was known to mix with showbiz people, and they would all be seen interacting at any of the hot spots on the Sunset Strip. I mean, of course Jean was going to come in contact with mobsters. What with dancing at the Florentine Gardens and Earl Carroll? But Jean hung out with a lot of people. She was very social and dated all types of men. But the biggest LA mobster at the time, the West Coast godfather, that's for sure, was Mickey Cohen. And Jean supposedly had more indirect ties with him. It were his henchmen she was known for apparently hanging out with, specifically Cohen's bodyguard, David Ogle, who went by the nickname Little Davy, and Frank Nicolai. Supposedly, Jean was seen with both men in Palm Springs the same week she disappeared. Now, at the time, these henchmen, they were out on bail awaiting trial. They had been arrested, I think, on conspiracy or, I don't know, something mobby. Mickey Cohen paid their bail, and the story goes that he did this so that he could have them offed before they could turn on him and take a plea deal. So, police went to Palm Springs to investigate and talk to witnesses, but it led nowhere. Especially because, and get this, Little Davy and Frank Nicolai both went missing the same time Jean did, never to be heard from again. And their bodies were never found either. Here in Los Feliz, just minutes from Griffith Park, on a pretty unassuming section of Franklin Avenue, tucked amongst some pretty great landscaping, sits an ominous house, sometimes referred to as the Jaws House because of the shark-like mouth in its center. And it's sometimes referred to as the Soden House because in 1926, architect Frank Lloyd Wright Jr. built it for his friend John Soden, a painter and photographer. Now, the house's fifth owner was Dr. George Hodel, the suspected Black Dahlia killer. He lived here from 1945 to 1950. And we're here because there is a theory that he was connected to Gene Spangler. And it's a theory I do not subscribe to at all. Mostly because I'm not so sure he was even the Black Dahlia killer. And to reiterate what I said earlier when we were at the Florentine Gardens, the Black Dahlia was the nickname given to Elizabeth Short, the 22-year-old who was found severed in half at the waist. Her body was completely scrubbed and cleaned out before being left on display in an empty lot, which was about 8 miles from where we are. And like I said, it's really the biggest unsolved case in LA history. The story has been told repeatedly, but in 2003, it got a new spin. I'm going to zoom out here. Hold on. All right. When George Hodel died, his son Steve began investigating his father's horrible, sordid past. George was publicly on trial for incest, his own daughter. He had wild sex parties here with young girls, young boys. He allegedly ran an abortion ring. And yes, he was a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder at the time when it happened, but police cleared him. Steve, he did find recordings from the FBI when they bugged this house, trying to capture a guilty George, but they didn't. And I've read the transcript. I've even read George's first book and looked at his website. He is very well spoken and he has compelling information, but I also see a lot of holes in his theory, a lot of coincidences and hunches. I know it's not fair to make a statement like that and then not spend time backing it up. So perhaps I'll make my own Black Dahlia tour one day. But for now, since this is a story about Gene Spangler, I have no problem saying why I don't believe that his dad killed her. But let's say, sure, his dad did kill her. Fine. Why would the Black Dahlia killer murder one victim, slice her in half, do some other horrific things to her body that I won't go into, and then leave it on display in public for the cops to find, but then kill another victim and completely hide her away forever? That makes no sense to me. I blame the media and the cops, though, because even though it had been 2 years, the newspaper ran headlines comparing Gene to the Black Dahlia. But when you read these articles, every one of them is void of anything substantial. The cops simply thought that the two were connected because they looked alike. Looked alike? I mean, come on, they were both white women with dark hair. They looked nothing alike to me, though. It was a completely irresponsible claim to make, with intention to sensationalize Gene's disappearance and really just cause panic to the public. But Steve and some other members of the Hodel family still think that their patriarch killed Gene. So much so that in 2012, 2013, he hired a retired police detective and his canine to sniff out this property. The dog apparently sniffed out what they believed to be human remains. Specifically around the backyard, near the property behind this one. Well, they contacted the owner, and it happened to be actress Laura Prepone from Orange is the New Black and that 70s show. She had no interest in having her property excavated and basically told Steve to get lost. But that has not stopped the Hodel family from their websites, numerous books, a podcast, TV episodes. I don't know. I don't want to be mean, but I kind of find it to be all in poor taste. It's also kind of how I feel about the 2019 series I Am the Night, starring Chris Pine. It's all about George Hodel and what a monster he was while living here, and they actually filmed here. They used the actual house. As a story location tour fan, I love it, but there's just something that makes me really sad for this incest victim daughter of his and for Elizabeth Short. But the house was used by Martin Scorsese as Ava Gardner's house in The Aviator. It also appeared briefly in LA Confidential and some other TV shows. They have big parties and events here. It's really a magnificent slice of Mayan-themed architecture. Not surprisingly, it even has secret passageways, adding to that mysterious allure. It also has 7 bedrooms, 4 baths, and covers about 5,600 square feet. And who knows, perhaps there will be excavations one day, and if I'm wrong, great. Closure to these cases, but I just don't think Gene Spangler is anywhere near this house. We have all seen enough Dateline episodes to know you always look at the husband. It was no different. Back in 1949, police obviously questioned Dexter Benner. After all, Jean said she was headed to see him the night she vanished, except when interrogated, he was like, "What are you talking about? I had no plans to see her." In fact, he claimed he hadn't seen Jean in weeks. He even offered an alibi. He was with his new wife of a few months, Lynn. I mean, come on, what spouse doesn't offer an alibi, especially a new spouse? Anyway, I actually don't know where they were living when Jean went missing in 1949, but this house here in Altadena, over 25 miles from Hollywood, was built in 1951, and I found documentation that says Dexter and Lynn were living here together in 1953. It has 4 bedrooms and a bath, only 1,100 square feet, but has a giant lot in a very rustic neighborhood, you can tell. I think I literally just heard a rooster. But Dexter and Lynn didn't stay here much longer after 1953. In 1956, they fled to Florida and would never return to California. Sure, they would have fled sooner, perhaps in October of 1949. But Dexter had a war to finish here in LA, his Spangler War, but this time it would be with Jean's mother, Florence. Poor Florence. Not only did she have to deal with the loss of a second child, but now she was about to lose her granddaughter. Shortly after Jean disappeared, Florence left Colgate Avenue for this smaller apartment, which is just around the corner here on Fairfax Avenue, 2-minute walk. She was living by herself here and was now embroiled in a nasty custody fight with Dexter and his new wife, Lynn. They were in and out of courtrooms where Dexter was just really so ugly, painting Jean out to be this Hollywood whore who left her daughter to run away with the mob, or who knows, maybe the mob killed her. Either way, he didn't want little Christine anywhere near her grandmother, Florence. And Florence was too scared to flat out accuse Dexter of murdering Jean, although she believed it. She insisted that her daughter did not run away and that she was entitled to see her granddaughter. Even new wife Lynn tried to legally adopt Christine, but the judge was like, yeah, no. The judge, though, he did spend time with Christine, and he came to the conclusion that she should live with her father, but that Grandma Florence should have some visitation rights twice a month. Seems fair to me, but not so much to Dexter. Apparently, when Florence would spend time with Christine, she would mention Jean, and Dexter did not like this. And this is a very interesting development that didn't come to light until a couple decades after Jean vanished. Sophie Spangler even mentioned it in that 2001 interview that she gave. Apparently, detectives told her that when they interviewed Dexter after finding Jean's purse, he had scratches on his face. Now, he told police that a crate of glasses fell on him at his factory. Sophie, she never saw these scratches because the day that Dexter came by to pick up Christine, immediately after Jean disappeared, he never came to the door. Christine ran out to his car and off they went.
He did not come up to the door. I wish he had of, and I wish now I look back and think about it, that if he'd have came up to the door, I'd have seen the scratches on his face. What the detectives told me.
Now, there's also some mentions that the police had also found a document showing that Dexter, who was an avid sailor, took his boat out to sea on the night Jean disappeared. Come on. I mean, if this did exist, how on earth did it never get investigated further? Even if there was no boat document, he still got off way too easy. He always managed to elude the law. And finally, he just decided to hell with it. To hell with Florence, and he flat out prevented her from even visiting Christine. A judge held him in contempt and sentenced him to a couple of weeks in jail, but he never served because he and Lynn fled to Florida, and they took Christine with them. The Los Angeles courts couldn't do anything about it as long as he never set foot back in California, and he didn't, ever. Florence Spangler never saw her granddaughter Christine ever again. Her only living connection to Jean, who, of course, she would also never see again. She felt in her heart that Jean had died. She also died believing that Dexter was responsible. And on another level of sadness, at least for me anyway, is that Florence lived for a very long time, and when she died in 1991 at the age of 97, little Christine was a very grown woman of 47. According to family, though, the two never reconnected for whatever reason. I mean, that is a very, very long time to live. Wondering whatever happened to your son, daughter, and granddaughter? My heart it really goes out to this poor woman. So here we are, out in Sylmar, about 20 miles from Hollywood, paying our respects. She ended up in Washington the last few years of her life, but she wanted to be buried next to her husband, Martin, who you're probably wondering why I haven't mentioned since we were in Highland Park. That's because he's really just as mysterious as Jean's disappearance. The only thing I could find on him is that in 1947, 2 years before Jean vanished, he was charged with manslaughter in a car accident that killed another driver. I couldn't find any results of this charge, but I do know that he ended up in a mental hospital out in Camarillo, where he died in 1962. He was never mentioned as living with Florence on Colgate or on Fairfax, so I'm assuming that he ended up in that hospital sometime around this accident, maybe even to avoid jail time. I'm not 100% on that, but it kind of adds up. And we also aren't too sure what officially happened to Eddie or to Jean, but their oldest daughter, Betsy, she passed away in 1996, and their oldest son, Richard, he died in 2003. Now, the 4 children provided a few grandkids for Martin and Florence, obviously Christine being one of them, and she is still alive. Once Jean's purse was found here in Ferndale, all hell broke loose, really, and it just became a mess that just kept getting bigger and bigger. It was front page news for some time, eventually dying down as police ran out of clues, as they really just kept hitting dead ends. For a few years throughout the early 50s, there were reports of Jean Spangler sightings all over various towns in California, Mexico, Arizona. The teenage daughter of a family friend swore she saw Jean riding in a car in the San Fernando Valley just a couple days after disappearing. All these leads, they never panned out, though. There were even people who came forward saying they had been mistakenly identified as Jean by random people who were just certain they were in her presence. The newspapers used so many different photos of Jean, in my opinion, where I think she looks just so different in each one. It's no wonder people were confused and all over the place. That's sort of how everyone was with their theories, too, though. Especially the mob one, which I cannot say I believe at all. Well, I certainly don't believe she ran away with anyone from the mob, that's for sure. Why on earth would a mother fight so hard for custody of her daughter for so long, and then after winning is like, yeah, I think I'll skip town? No, it makes no sense. Neither does the mob killing her. Their style was more along the lines of paying women off, not necessarily killing them. I do believe she was pregnant, though. I think the most likely scenario is that she was going to have an abortion that night, and since it was illegal, she got a botched one and died in the process. Her body disposed of somewhere it would never be found. Now, do I think that Kirk Douglas killed her? No. But back in those days, there were what they called studio fixers. You had a problem, a fixer would fix it. So if Kirk did get Jean pregnant, and I think it is highly likely that he did, he could have had a studio fixer take care of it, but I don't think he physically killed her. Eddie Mannix, he was a notorious fixer who some believe had Superman's George Reeves killed. Another story location tour I did. And I already mentioned how ridiculous I think the Black Dahlia theory is. So that really only leaves Dexter, and that's the direction I tend to head. And I'll say it again, the man should have been investigated a lot further, especially those scratches on his face and this notion that he went out to sea that night. It's a travesty that he was dismissed so quickly. Now, I tried to research this case the best I could. Remember Pat McCauley, Jean's friend who threw the engagement party for Jean and Dexter in Cheviot Hills? Well, I tracked down a son of hers, a man named Bill, a very, very nice man who I spoke with on the phone. He didn't know Jean and didn't have too much to add, but he did say that he recalled his mom, who passed away in 2011, talking about her friendship with Jean and the disappearance. He believes that her opinion also leaned towards Dexter. And keep in mind, this was a woman who knew them both. She's not the only one. You know, it appears the whole Spangler family leaned that way. And Dexter Benner died in Florida on May 7th, 2007, at the age of 87. His wife, Lynn, she died just a couple years ago, on August 15th, 2019. But as for Dexter and Jean's daughter, Christine, she stayed in Florida and continues to live there today. She will be 80 in April of this year, 2024. And she and her father, they both refused interviews, and neither spoke of Jean since they left California back in 1956. So I wasn't too surprised when I called Christine just 2 days ago. I found her number and I called. She does not want to participate, and I will leave it at that. And look, I respect it. I do. However, I couldn't make this story without at least reaching out and giving her the opportunity to, I don't know, defend her father, tell her side of the story, or just let her say whatever she wanted about this. But she declined, pretty much solidifying the fact that we will probably never know what happened to Jean. And oh, look, a coyote. One of Griffith Park's many, many characters. There's also another theory that might sound insane, but Jean could still be alive. Before you laugh at me, remember that when Kirk Douglas died in 2020, he was 103. She would be 101 now. It's not out of the question, but yes, it is highly unlikely. And unless Christine decides to ever talk and offer up anything new, we're really never going to know what happened to Jean. It still remains an open, unsolved case. Actually, this fall will mark the 75th anniversary of Jean walking down Colgate Avenue into the night. And today, Jean's story, if remembered at all, is usually lumped in with a handful of other women who met mysterious ends around the same time as Jean, like Mimi Boomhauer, a 48-year-old wealthy heiress and socialite. She walked out of her Bel Air mansion, leaving a salad on the kitchen table and her front door wide open, never to be seen or heard from again. She really had nothing in common with Jean whatsoever, but her purse was found a couple of days later near the beach, so police and media somehow linked these cases. I don't think they have anything to do with one another. And while Jean never got a star on the Walk of Fame, or really even landed any solid roles, she did manage to become famous, but like I said, for all the wrong reasons. Nonetheless, she'll forever be part of that Hollywood lore that so many people like to explore, the dark side. And thank you so much for watching, and if you feel like it, let me know your theories and ideas. I really love talking about these stories with everyone. And until the next one.